So earlier today, I did this Ask Me Anything Zoom call where people who were on my list could just sign up and join. And it was like about 40 questions that were asked. And one of them jumps out that somebody asked me, like, how did I get started in copywriting? And the short version of that is that when I discovered copywriting, I had actually graduated from college a few months before, like 6 or 8 months before. And I had an undergrad degree in psychology, and I knew that I was going to be moving across the country in a few months for my fiance, soon to be my wife's, grad school program in Oregon. And so the best job that I could get with an undergrad degree in psychology, knowing that I was going to be moving away in like 9 months, was answering the customer service calls for the local gas utility company. And so when you didn't pay your gas bill all winter, and we came out on the first warm day of March or April, first warm day of spring, and shut off your service, I was the guy who you called to blame for your service getting shut off because you didn't pay your bill. I was the guy that you called and yelled at. And it was a pretty miserable existence. But at the same time, I was on the noon to 9 p.m. shift. And the great thing about the noon to 9 p.m. shift was that the majority of people who call the gas company don't want to do it after about 6 or 7 p.m. And so especially at the end of the day, I had this long period of time where I would barely get any calls, and I had a lot of time between calls. And somehow, somewhere during that time, I discovered a book called The Well-Fed Writer. And prior to that, I considered myself a writer. Like my minor in college was in English, and I took a lot of classes in writing. And yet, like, my biggest success as a writer was when my grandma bought 10 copies of my self-published poetry book to give to her kids. And that was my biggest financial success as a writer up to that point. And so I found this book called The Well-Fed Writer, and it promised a completely different lifestyle from the starving artist stereotype. It said that if you are willing to be a freelance commercial writer, like if you write for businesses, you could actually make a good living as a writer from your writing ability. And considering that, without going into grad school in psychology, I didn't have much of a future in that field, I thought that this is interesting to me. And in that book, he said that there were these other kinds of writers. Like for him, he was happy to write white papers and annual reports and so on. But that to me was not the part that was exciting. The part that was exciting were this other kind of writer that he kind of talked trash about, which were the direct response people who would write sales letters that you would live or die based on the results of your sales letters. And I said, that's interesting. And then I went down the rabbit hole of this entire field of direct response copy, which to me was incredibly interesting and compelling. And I went on and I read a bunch of books, and within a few months, I actually managed to land a job. It wasn't at a direct response company, but it was at a publishing company with online publishing that I was able to do a lot of direct response stuff kind of underneath the surface of what they were doing. And from there, I just kept growing and growing. And eventually, 4.5 years later, I quit that job, and I went on and launched my independent business, consulting on direct response marketing and doing copywriting campaigns for clients. And that is my origin story. And there are some really important details about it that really I have nailed down, that are things like talking about I was the guy that you would call when you didn't pay your gas bill all winter and we came out on the first warm day of spring to shut off your service. And I was the guy that you'd yell at. And I talk about discovering copywriting, and there are some types of writers that are this commercial writing that doesn't focus on response. But for me, it was all about getting response. And I talk about going down the rabbit hole of studying all these people. And I talk about getting my first marketing job within a few months. And I talk about launching my career after that as an independent consultant and freelance copywriter. And I cover all these important bases fairly quickly. I mean, at this point, we're about 5 minutes into this video. And I have it pretty rote. It's not exactly the same every time, but most of the details remain the same from telling to telling to telling. And if I want to go on a podcast and talk to copywriters, or I want to go on whatever and talk to this audience, a direct response audience, a copywriting audience, a business audience, talking about things like my biggest financial success as a writer before that was that my grandma bought 10 copies of my self-published poetry book. And then I've translated this into a successful career, more than a decade and a half now of copywriting since then. And it talks about being self-made through the research that I did. I'm not doing the same thing as I got a degree in. And the story does so many selling jobs for me, and it connects with the reader in so many places, in so many ways, on so many levels, or the listener, because you're not reading this video, but it connects with the audience in all of these different ways. And I automatically become more human to the audience, and I automatically align myself with many different elements of people in my industry through telling this story. And it's naturally interesting, not only because as humans, we are interested in stories and we're predisposed to learn from stories, but also because one of the most common questions that you get asked from people both inside and outside of your industry, when they hear what you do, they say, well, how'd you get into this? And so it automatically answers this this core question that people ask when they're meeting somebody new. And having your origin story and having it understood and retellable in different formats and different ways at different times, kind of on demand, allows you to connect with readers in a very interesting way, or connect with your audience in a very interesting way, connect with prospects in a very interesting way. And it allows you to dive in with them and help them feel like, oh, well, maybe this is somebody that I want to be around, that I want to connect with, that I want to follow, whatever, depending on your, how your business is structured, right? And so I'm always interested, when I'm working with a client, I'm always interested to find their origin story. And if I'm going to write a sales letter for a stock investment newsletter, I will get on the phone and I'll interview them. And one of the questions that I'll ask is that universal question, well, how did you get into this anyway? And one of them that it definitely stands out in my memory is this guy who's a wildly successful in investment technology guy, both the technology of picking investments and investing in technology companies, and has a great track record there and all of that, and has this long background. And I said, how did you get into this anyway? Because all of that is great, but there's a real inhuman part. You don't feel quite as human when this guy is an algorithms expert and so on, right? There's no human connection in explaining all of that background. So you're looking for, how can I add a human connection? And his answer was that, his dad was a fairly successful entrepreneur, but not wildly successful. And his mom actually didn't work, and his dad died young. And when his dad died young, his mom suddenly had all this money, but didn't have any idea of how to grow it or even maintain it and make it last. And he told me he was a journalist at the time, and he was writing business articles. And he said, well, can I write investment articles? And he used that journalism credential that you get, the credential as a journalist that you get, that allows you in the door to talk to people. He used that to interview all these investors and traders and learn how they invested and what their focus was and all of that about the markets. And he was writing stories based on interviewing all of these people. And he was also using that to learn how to invest his mom's money. And when he invested his mom's money, he was able to make it grow using what he learned. And then he would apply what he learned to like learning more about the markets. And it was this feedback cycle, but it all started with like losing his dad and wanting to help his mom manage the money that his dad had set aside. And there's just this huge human X factor to that's super powerful and that connects with people on a completely different level. And so, of course, I included that in the promotion, and the promotion did pretty well. And for you, like, you need to ask yourself, like, what is my origin story? What are the important details? How does it show that I'm human? How does it like create connections with my prospects, with my audience? And when and where and how can I use it to support my connection while I'm selling with my prospects? And this is worth investment of time and energy and effort to find and to refine, both for yourself and for any clients if you're doing any copywriting work or messaging work for your clients, because oftentimes it's these stories that are like the X factor of making a promotion work versus not. So if this is something that's interesting to you, check out the link in the description. I have this story selling masterclass where I actually went into all of these different types of story selling templates, including the origin story, but different ways that you're going to use stories in the context of like connecting with your prospect and defining yourself as an interesting character. And then ultimately how to use stories as part of a bigger selling process. So what stories to use when. And it's rather revolutionary, and it's different than anything that I could find out there in terms of story selling. And it's part of the BTMSinsiders training library. So check out the link in the description to learn more about the story selling masterclass. My name is Roy Furr. This has been a video issue of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. You could certainly leave a comment below with your origin story or any questions that you have or takeaways that you have. You can leave those below. Also, make sure you click that like button before you go so you get more content like this. Also, so this content is shared with more people like you. And if you have somebody you'd like to share it with, you can share it with them directly. And subscribe if you're not yet. You can subscribe here. You can also go to breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com, get my daily emails covering marketing, copywriting, business building, selling, story selling, personal success, and more. Again, my name is Roy Furr. This is a video issue of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Thanks for watching. I hope you've gotten some value, a lot of value out of this, and I hope that you use this as inspiration to find and tell your origin story. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye.